Eccles Business Buzz podcast. I'm your host, Frances Johnson, and I'm so happy you've joined me as we continue our exploration of the new strategic direction, priorities, and goals here at the David Eccles School of Business. The first strategic priority identified in the planning process is student success. That means retaining and graduating as many students as possible, but it also means enhancing and elevating the experience students have here at the Eccles School so each student can seek and reach their personal peak. Here today to talk about some exciting new approaches to student success is Jess Taverna. Jess is Associate Dean of Undergraduate Programs at the Eccles School. She is involved in all aspects of the undergraduate program, including admissions, curriculum, student engagement programs, the Business Scholars Experience, Eccles Global, and cohort programs. Jess and her husband moved to Utah from the East Coast in 2002 and have been in love with the mountains and the desert ever since. Jess, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks, Frances. It's great to be here.
Well, Jess, when we talk about student success, we often refer to it as our North Star. Whether we're faculty, whether we're staff, this is what we are really driving towards. And there obviously wouldn't be a University of Utah, there wouldn't be a David Eccles School of Business if we didn't have students. So what does it mean to have student success as our leading strategic priority moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Frances. I mean, it seems sort of obvious, right? Students are what a university exists for. I have devoted my whole professional life just about to higher education. So it is something I'm deeply passionate about. And I think it's important to recognize that we place a lot of value on higher ed, but it is unlike K through 12, we don't provide it free in this country, in the US. And so I think we have a real serious obligation and responsibility to make sure that we're delivering value to students because they are, most of them are paying at least some amount to be here and have this experience. And so delivering that value means ensuring that they get as much as they can from their experience with us while they're here, and also move on to the professional phase of life in a timely manner. They're not languishing in college. They're not taking, too long to get to that point where they're making money and returning that value, and that they're able to succeed in whatever it is they do. So it's really about seeing everything we do at a university through the lens of student success and students. Universities, particularly big R1 universities like the University of Utah and the Eccles School, which is a large business school, are complex organizations. They do have other missions and other priorities. Putting student success at the center means how do we think about those other priorities and the way that they can impact students as well as achieve their own objectives? So faculty research, the innovation, the development that comes from that is hugely important for its own sake, but how do we think about that in how it can play into a student's experience as well? And sometimes that means getting creative, looking at ways that we can involve students in faculty research, involve students in the work that our centers and institutes are doing that are impacting the community or impacting corporate partners, but also have a space for students to be part of that experience. And that's really one of the great ways that we can leverage those things to enhance the student experience. But it also means saying that how do we leverage all the other things that a university and a business school are all about in a way that makes sure that they obviously don't negatively impact the student experience and don't deprioritize it. But more than that, where can we go beyond that to actually involve students in all of those aspects? Because in some ways, that's how they get that real world experience. Universities are businesses in a sense. And so there's a lot of opportunity for students to practice their business knowledge and skills through all of the other work that's happening at a university. And so I think that's really, it's about thinking about the whole student experience while they're here, what they're going to go on to when they leave us, and also thinking about how we embed students in the whole picture of what a university is all about.
Jess, when you and I have talked about student success before, I think you made a really great point that we aren't just sending students to class and giving them a degree. That's not the whole story of student success. And sometimes it does sort of get boiled down to that. How many students are we enrolling? Are they staying enrolled? Are they graduating? But there's a lot more to the story of student success than just that. Our value proposition is that we're giving students more than just classes and a degree. So when you think about that larger story, what are the components? And I think you've mentioned some, right? We're talking about faculty research. We're talking about experiential learning. What are the components that really build a robust and sort of broad sense of student success beyond just coming to college and graduating?
Yeah, I think it's an important question, and especially a timely one, because, for a long time, traditional universities didn't have much competition. They were the only way for a student to get that next credential and that next degree was to go to a traditional university where you're living in a campus and you're doing all these things. And those are expensive models. And there are now a lot of other alternative ways for students to get knowledge and competence in certain specific, disciplines, industry areas, skills. When you think of things like Western Governors University, more competency-based approaches, the massive online classrooms that are offered by any number of entities, Khan Academy, Google, et cetera, right? There are lots of other less costly ways to get a credential that says, I have learned, say, accounting and this set of knowledge and these set of, specific skills. And so we have to be able to say, like, what is different about a university education? What do we do that justifies that added cost? In some cases, the added time. In some cases, a little bit of reduced flexibility in how you go about getting that. And so I think we really need to pay attention to the full picture of what we're doing. I think one example of this is USHE, the University System of Higher Education, commissioned a survey of over 500 Utah employers and asked them about, like, what are you seeing in college graduates and what are you not seeing that you should be seeing? And one of the big takeaways from that was a focus on what they call durable skills, which I really love as an alternative to the name we've often used, which is quote unquote soft skills, which sort of implies something lesser,
Yeah, they're not as
fluffier.
important. Yeah.
Not as important, but employers highlighted one of the key challenges with what they're seeing with college grads is a lack of these durable skills. And I really love that term. We're talking about things like communication, interpersonal skills, even things like resilience, a little bit of grit, understanding how to bounce back from challenges, critical thinking, creativity, right? All of these things that we've, again, previously called soft skills, but are really core to life. And I love the term durable because I think it signifies, one, these endure through all aspects of your life. This isn't just even about your job. It's also things that you need in personal relationships and if you're volunteering, other roles that you might have, and they endure throughout your life. And so a university education and a space like the Eccles School is differently positioned to actually do the work of building those kinds of skills in students. That's different from a model where you might be doing an online class completely on your own. You're getting a really important set of foundational knowledge, but you don't have the chances to demonstrate or build these kinds of skills. So how do we think about supporting the whole student in that way and really developing those critical thinking, creativity, resilience, grit, communication, and all the ways that we can do that because we have students in classrooms together. We challenge them to engage in different ways. So I think that's one piece that a university and the Eccles School offers that's different from some of those other models. Another is that we really focus on the whole student and we really think about how do we embed students in a community which supports them in developing some of these other skills like resilience, for example, that makes getting through the classes easier. It makes getting to graduation in a timely manner easier if you're also being supported and feeling like a whole person and a well person and someone who belongs to a community. And then that community experience, you're in classes with people, you're joining clubs with people, you're interacting with faculty and staff in workshops and luncheons. That then translates into your network, which I think is the other main thing that we deliver that is key to student success, is this group of people that are going to be, you never know who's going to be that person that's going to help you get that first job or the second job or the internship. I had my first job out of college was a professor that I'd had a year before, hadn't seen him in a year, but I'd gotten to know him. He knew enough about me to know what my interests were. Had a colleague who worked in a research institute that was looking for someone for a research assistant job and called me up 3 weeks before I was graduating. It was a better offer than anything I had on the table at the time. So you never know who that person's going to be. And I think universities and the business school, the programming, both in the classroom and outside, creates this environment where you get embedded in a community and then that community becomes your network. You also have access to a network of alums, of donors, of corporate partners who are all invested in the Eccles School, that are those people who can, again, open up that first door for you. And so I think those are some of the key things that are part of student success that go beyond just that graduation rate, that metric of, how long did it take you to get out of here and what degree did you officially get at the end? What was your piece of paper? And I think the last piece that universities do that's really essential that I think is a part of student success is, we're building citizens. We're creating people who are going out, they're business leaders, they're leaders in their community. I think about things like Governor Cox's Disagree Better initiative. If we're doing our jobs at a university, we are putting students in positions to develop the skills that allow them to go out, have reasoned and reasonable conversation and disagreement with other people, whether that's in the work, in politics, in a community setting, and actually be able to move us forward as a society in those ways. I think that's an essential part of what universities do. And if we can equip students with the confidence, the sense of, I know who I am, I have a sense of my core values, I have a sense of growth that I've seen in myself, we're setting people up for not just their first job, but for that whole long-term career. And all those components are things that can happen in a place like the Eccles School that are different from what you might do in other ways that you could get a credential.
Yeah, I love how you've described this as really an integrated experience, that my professor doesn't just teach me, but maybe that's a person who can get me a job, or my friends or my roommates aren't just the people I hang out with, right? But they're the people I go to class with. Maybe they're the people that I start a business with, and they also contribute to my sense of belonging and well-being in the space. I think that's so important. Even when I think of myself as a college student, I don't know that I appreciated
Yeah.
those opportunities and those connections, and probably didn't take advantage of them as much as I could have or should have.
Yeah, I think that's part of our job, right? Obviously students don't always like it, but it's not just about giving students what they want or what they think they want. It's right, there are things we know they need. And similarly, like I look back, I was a history major as an undergrad. And now I work, and then I went to graduate school for political science. And now I'm working in a business school and I'm using a whole set of skills. I'm not necessarily using the content knowledge that I gained from, a course in modern European history all the time, but I'm certainly using all of the other things that I got from that whole college experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jess, one of the ways in the past that the Eccles School has delivered this experience was through a program called Business Scholars, a cohort-based program that was designed to really focus students around these durable skills and a sense of community, offer kind of an elevated experience. That's been reimagined. Now we call it the Business Scholars Experience. But those components of this sort of premier program have now been integrated into the experience that all students are having at the Eccles School. Talk to us a little bit about how that looks and why that shift is good news for students coming in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Business Scholar program existed in its sort of original formulation for, over 10 years. And so anytime you're going to change something that's been around for that long, it's, you do that with a little bit of, sometimes some hesitation, a little concern about what you're stepping into. But I think the Business Scholar program had evolved from its start with a small cohort of about 40 students, right? A really intensive small community program for super high achieving students. By the last few years of the program, it was somewhere between 500 and 550 students were having that first year experience in Business Scholars. And at that point, that meant that it was more than half of our freshmen. And so at that point, it's sort of like, okay, 55% of our students are getting one experience, 45% are not. What does that tell us? And how do we think about version 2.0? What does that say that we should be looking to do next? And so the goal in part was, one, to sort of look at what was still working in the Business Scholar program and what were some of the challenges. Some of the core of that program involved company visits that were becoming increasingly hard to do, particularly post-COVID. In general, companies just weren't in the office as much. Trying to get company visits for 500 plus students, it gets really difficult. It's hard to find companies. So we were struggling with some of the aspects of the program. And it was also, in order to deliver that program, there was a significant cost to the students. And so it wasn't necessarily always equitably available to access that program. And so we started saying, okay, we've reached this point where we're now kind of in this weird 50-50 split of what our students are getting. How do we take the best of what Business Scholars has been and can be and deliver that across the entire Eccles School School undergraduate program. And so a few things that are really unique and different. The program first now is a 4-year program. That was something that was often asked about. Students would be wrapping up their first year in the first version of Business Scholars and saying, well, what next? What do I do next year? I was like, well, you kind of you do whatever you want to do now. You do the regular program and
back to your regular scheduled programming.
And hopefully you've learned some things, and maybe it means you'll take more advantage of, engagement and experiential opportunities, but we don't have a formal program beyond the first year. So we really wanted to revamp and think about what can we do throughout a student's career. We know that sophomores often they talk about the sophomore slump. First year, you're super energized, you're excited, college is all new, you're trying all these things. And then you hit your second year and it's hard and college is difficult and you're having to realize I need to make choices and maybe I'm not sure how to do that. And we see sophomores often sort of start to disengage, which is exactly the wrong time for that. We want that as like, now let's dig in deeper, because by, sophomore summer, we want to think about internships. Junior year, you want to really be building towards that career. So how can we address some of that? And how do we do better setting up students for that exit, like getting them ready to launch? And some of those pieces that, again, aren't necessarily in the traditional curriculum. So we now have a model where students do a 1 credit hour each of 8 semesters, so over their whole 4 years, and it's really tailored for where they are. So first semester, welcome to college. Let's start your leadership journey. Let's start you thinking about the habits that you should engage in that, again, push you beyond just checking the boxes of these are the classes I have to take, but really establishing that mindset of engagement. So the course is built around a portion of the requirement for grading and passing the class is engaging in a number of workshops, student club events, all kinds of other opportunities that we have, and then reflection. So the other key part of the assignments are journal reflections. What activities did I take, part in the last couple of weeks? What did I hear about in my class? What resources am I aware of? What am I going to do with that? How am I starting to choose where I want to go? And really, that's the foundation of the first year. And the second year, we really get deep into more career development and major selection. Where exactly am I going to go within business? And what do I want to do with that? Because one of the other questions I don't think we often ask as much is, okay, which major do you want? Is it finance? Is it accounting? Is it information systems? Great, but why? And where do you want to use that knowledge? You can be an accountant in a Big Four. You can be an accountant in a public sector, government. You could be an accountant for a nonprofit in an area you're really passionate about, right? And so we haven't always done a great job of helping students think about that part of it. We can help you pick your major, but then what? Where are you going to actually use that knowledge?
Yeah, what impact do you want to
exactly? Where do you want to have that value? Yep. Yeah. And so the second year is really kind of all about that. And then third and fourth year is going to be you're in your major now. Like, let's make sure you are taking full advantage of all of the opportunities. Let's make sure we set you up to get an internship and help you prepare for that interview. Let's make sure that if you want to be involved in study abroad, in Goff Strategic Leadership Institute, in other centers and institutes, right? How do you think about where you're going to take full advantage? And then final semester, getting ready to launch. Like I said, things like thinking about your social media presence from a professional perspective rather than the perspective of a high school teenager student, right? Like you're coming out, you've got, whatever you've got out there.
Now. Ooh, yeah.
And we don't talk to students about that. And, and it's not something you get in a traditional classroom and traditional curriculum. So Business Scholar experience gives us a space to do those kinds of things with students. Really think about personal finance, right? We know that people say all the time, like, I wish instead of making me take, physics or calculus or whatever in high school, they'd made me take a personal finance class. So we're going to do workshops on things like that. We're going to really help students fill in that full picture. And I think it's really about that holistic mindset and about them, again, establishing habits of engagement, challenge, pushing yourself to do things that you're not sure you're comfortable with yet, which sets you up for that resilience that employers are looking for, and that reflection. Okay, I spent this semester really digging in this club. Where do I want to take that next? What does that mean for me? What have I learned about myself? Where am I starting to understand where my strengths and weaknesses are and how I can use those? And I think it enhances the classroom experience because it also gives students more of a sense of purpose. Why am I here at all? That is often not easy to get through the class. You're struggling with principles and grades and tests and the schedule. And having these other things going on alongside it, I think helps students understand their why, which gives them that grit to get through their degree when stuff gets hard.
Yeah, it puts everything in context for you. You're driving I mean, back to what we said at the beginning, right? We want to deliver more than just a degree.
It's just so, yep.
Students also want to be driving to more than just a degree, right? If I'm just kind of slogging through until I graduate, then,
Yep.
you know, your motivation as a student can, I think, really suffer if you don't have a bigger context and picture of
Yep.
why am I driving
Exactly.
for that degree? What do I want to, as you're saying, what impact do I want to make with that? I also think, Jess, that part of student success is having good students at the Eccles
Yes.
School, right? We want to attract top tier, talented, committed students. How does that figure into these, new business scholars experience, other things that are happening at the Eccles School, this goal of student success? How do we also think about attracting students in the context of all those efforts?
Yeah, and I think I want to start by saying too that the value of having programming that attracts those top tier students is not just about those top tier students. It's also about the presence of those students and the impact they have on the student body as a whole. So, right, we know from so much research that, you are who you surround yourself with. So the more we can bring in really top, high achieving, motivated students, they set a tone. And maybe that student who didn't have that experience through high school for whatever reason starts to see the possibility and can follow along. So I think there's both, there's value for those high achieving students themselves in some of the programs that I'll talk about. It's also bringing those students in just helps transform the culture of the student body as a whole. And it moves everybody further along towards this sense of really seizing all of the opportunities. So I think it's a value for everybody, even though the programs themselves may kind of focus on a certain group. But yeah, that's been one of the questions for sure, since, we said we're switching up business scholars and now everyone's going to have, it's like, well, what about those students who want to do more? And there are a couple of opportunities that we've got that are starting next year. And then we'll have, we're looking at others as well. So one is that some of the components that had been in the previous version of the Business Scholar program, the first year included some company visits, a leadership retreat, some other intensive programming. That's now happening in the second year for students who opt in to be part of the Business Scholar experience as ambassadors. So those are students who are going to serve as mentors for the first year students. They're also going to help support the first year program. And in part, in exchange for what they give us there, they're going to be getting this enhanced second year experience. So they'll be participating in a leadership retreat at the start of the second year in Zion, partnering with Goff Strategic Leadership Institute. Again, really building on that first year foundation to take it to that next step and start them thinking about, where do I want to develop most as a leader in this coming year. They'll also have a domestic company visit in the fall semester, and an international trip built around a series of company visits in the spring semester. And that's probably going to be, we're still kind of finalizing, we're working on our selection right now of that student group. Those are students coming out of our first year program, as well as some second year students who will have an opportunity. We'll probably have about 60 to 70 of those students. So kind of getting back a little bit more to where Business Scholars started, with a group of students who really are demonstrating that commitment. One of the reasons that I'm excited about it as a second year program is it gives us a little more of a chance to know these students and to understand who's really going to commit in the way that we want. That's always hard to evaluate someone coming out of high school. And you take a little bit of a risk when you do that, bringing them in as freshmen in that way.
And hard for them
to know if this is
the students themselves. Always as freshmen either.
Is this really where I want to be? And so for second year, we know kind of more of like, this is what I want to do and where I want to dig in. And then I think it's also allows us to have students who are a little bit better prepared when we go out in these company visits. They're going to be a little bit more invested. They've got a better foundation of knowledge. They help us put our best foot forward in those relationships. And then I think they also get more out of that experience because, again, they have a little bit more sense of why they're doing it and what they're there for and what they're getting out of it. So that's one opportunity. So for students who come in as freshmen, that's going to be a carrot out there for them to strive towards for their second year. We also have a new program called Rising Business Leaders. That's a partnership with the Ivory Foundation, the Goff Strategic Leadership Institute, and the University of Utah President's Office to provide scholarship funding for both tuition and housing for students, as well as intentional programming built around leadership. So this is for freshmen. So this will be that, first group. We'll have a group of about 20 freshmen that we're targeting for that one, who are, they express that I'm ready to go all in on leadership. And I think the nice thing too there is they'll be business students. They're going to be starting with the business curriculum, but it's also about leadership, which is applicable in so many different areas. So they'll all be living together in a cohort. They'll be getting programming focused a lot around really intensifying that first year experience that they'll otherwise have with business scholars. This is going to add kind of that layer on top of it for students who are really, again, ready to commit in a way of, I want to start digging in as an individual to think about who I am and what kind of value and impact I want to have in the world. And it's going to provide a great opportunity for students to do that. I'm really excited, hoping we get students with a wide range of interests of where they think right now they want to apply that value. And so we get people with like lots of different goals and objectives that can kind of come together in a community and help each other think through that as well. And then we're starting to look at potentially some other first year and second year enhanced experiences. We'll be working on a kind of revamped version of a more traditional curriculum honors program. So the honors college here on campus has started to transform a bit how they're working. And we will be looking at kind of how can we revamp honors so that it's both what they're doing in the classroom, but again, also these enhanced experiential programs, case competitions, really looking at, how can we get honors to mean not just academic, but also that full picture. Thinking about programs, for example, for students who are really quantitatively driven to kickstart, they come in with the highest level of AP Calc and they've done AP Stats and they've done all that stuff. How can we help students who are really interested in getting into the more quantitative fields, which often, lead into really great jobs in consulting? That's a huge foundation. I mentioned earlier, I was a history undergrad and a political science and specifically a political theorist in grad school. And I can look back and say, man, I wish somebody had forced me to do more analytics and quantitative work because you need it. You can't avoid it. Doesn't matter what you're doing. So having an opportunity to dig more into that discipline. It's something we've done in our regular curriculum. We've added more quantitative and analytical coursework for everybody, but that's another space where we're looking to really provide an opportunity for students who are coming in with a higher level of prep in there and ready to go further with it.
I've heard Dean Dirks talk several times about this idea that if we can provide these cohort-based programs that focus on these durable skills that you've mentioned, like communication, innovation, creativity, problem solving, helping students develop a sense of purpose faster and more deeply, and then you add these quantitative skills, that is like a very formidable package. That really is a person who can bring a lot of value to whatever career, job, company, further education, wherever they land.
Exactly. And I think something that we're doing really well in the Eccles School and undergrad program is thinking intentionally about how all those parts fit together. So there are plenty of institutions and schools that have great curriculum and they have experiential opportunities. What we've done is really develop a learning framework that says these are the overarching goals. How does that happen in the classroom? How does that happen in the business scholar experience component? How does that happen outside of any kind of class context and all the other opportunities? And how are they reinforcing each other? So what experience you're having in the classroom? Where do we know that you're getting some teamwork? How can we leverage that in these other spaces as well? And I think having that really intentional, holistic, because often what you find is like the curriculum's over here and you take your classes, and then we also say do this other stuff, but we don't connect the dots for students. So that's something we're doing, is saying here are a set of goals, and these goals are realized in the classroom in these ways and these other places, in your experiences in a way that come together. Being able to send that message to a prospective, really high achieving student who's motivated, whose parents are motivated, for them to kind of have that full experience. We can say, you're going to develop, teamwork skills in this way in your classes, in this way in your club involvement or your leadership roles that you take on, and really be able to show students how that whole picture comes together, which I think is a unique part of what we're doing. And that creates that culture. Again, top students want to be here, and then those students motivate other students to really want to strive to that next level as well.
Jess, as you think about the other strategic priorities that have been developed, so we've identified these three strategic priorities: student success at the center or the top, or however, the most important. But then we're also talking about societal impact and the reputation and the legacy of the David Eccles School of Business, how it's perceived sort of out in the world. How do you see student success supporting these other priorities?
Yeah, I think, one really core way, particularly thinking about societal impact and also our legacy, is really thinking about what kind of student, future business leader we are helping to cultivate and train. So we were fortunate to be part of a series produced by BBC Storyworks in partnership with AACSB, the business schools accrediting body. And please don't ask me to remember what that acronym stands for, because it is not as intuitive as you might think.
I won't. I don't know either.
We can perhaps look it up later. But it was part of a series on sort of the leader generation, and they were looking at schools that are really thinking about what kind of business leader and future leader are we cultivating. And we are part of that, focused on our efforts around wellness. And so really thinking about how are we supporting the whole student in creating students who are feeling empowered and capable. If we think about wellness, we think about someone who's struggling, whether that's emotionally, socially, financially. It's difficult to succeed in the classroom if you're dealing with all these other challenges. So we have a lot of programming that we highlighted in that series around supporting student wellness. That's great for the students while they're here. It's important. It's essential. It's part of how we should be thinking about the student experience. But also what it's doing is setting up those students to be thinking about that when they go out and become future leaders. So they're going to take that understanding of the whole person. I was supported as a whole person, and that helped me succeed better in my classes, in my degree programs. And how can I do that as a leader? How can I think about that for my employees, my staff? Because it's just as important, obviously, in the workplace. Again, same thing. If you're struggling, whether it's financially, emotionally, socially, or other ways, it's hard to excel. It's hard to be your best. So I think a huge impact we can have is how we talk to students about what does it mean to go off into your career and become that leader. What kind of tone are you going to set? So I think that's one really impactful way that we support the whole student here, and we embed that in them in the mindset of that, and they carry that forward into their careers. I think the other is our programming. In terms of focusing on student success, we know that there are students who face larger hurdles, in particular first-generation college students who don't have that experience in their families of what it's like to go to college. What does it take to get through college? Low-income students who are often, again, facing really serious financial hurdles or other challenges. And so we have programs that are really moving the needle for those students. If we impact a first generation student, we're not just impacting them, right? We're impacting their family, we're impacting their communities. They become a role model for younger siblings, nieces and nephews, right? Others in their family. That sets a new kind of tone for what's possible. And I think that's a massive impact. And the kind of programs that we can do that focus again on the whole student, how are we supporting you in all those ways, in particular, can have a really significant impact on first generation and low income students. And then I think also just, again, cultivating this mindset in students of your why. What is your purpose? Again, you carry that forward. So you go out into the world, not just looking for a job, because you weren't just looking for a degree. You were thinking about your whole experience as college. Now you're thinking about your whole experience out there in your professional life, and where you're going to have an impact, where you're going to add value. How do you want to do that? How do you bring yourself into that? And so I think that the way we transform the student experience carries forward into what they're going to do as future business leaders. And then in terms of our legacy, at the most basic level, the more we can support students, the more we improve student success metrics. Rankings come along with it, and those are part of our reputation and part of how we're looked at. But I think it's also building the more important part for me, I guess maybe not more important, but at least as important, again, is that environment, is that sense of community where you're part of a whole experience, not just going to classes. That creates that sense of pride, that passion for the Eccles School that turns you into a passionate alum who wants to give back. And that's also part of building that legacy, because a lot of what we want to do for students relies on having partners, alums, donors, employers who care about the Eccles School. And we want to build students who are going to go on and become those people who can come back and help pass it back down to the next generation of students. And I think that's super impactful for our legacy. Having distinctive programs like Rising Business Leaders, majors, like the way we're approaching business scholars, both the whole program and the second year program. Eccles Global, our internal study abroad program, is relatively unique to really have a program that's built around business, but facilitates that experience abroad. I think those are also all things that help just elevate our brand and our reputation.
Jess, we've talked a little bit about the changing landscape of higher ed, right? That there are so many more options now than there used to be when it comes to the type of university you can attend, the type of programs that are available now, a big range of prices and flexibility, all these things. Industry also changes at such a fast rate, right? When we think about AI, which we talked about last season,
Yep.
when we think about the way that globalization has changed manufacturing and supply chains and all these things, everything is changing really fast in higher ed, where our students are now, in industry, where they are going to go. When we think about student success in that context, what do we need to do to keep up with those changes so we're not just preparing students for what they need now, but preparing them for the future? How do you see student success and what we're doing around student success really looking forward and preparing students for their whole life, not just right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's, AI, I think really put a microscope on this. This has always been a challenge, but I think, when ChatGPT 3 first launched and became publicly accessible, I think that was what, like 2022 or 23 November. It was like a month before finals.
Yeah.
Everybody was suddenly scrambling and going, oh my goodness, what is this thing? And what are students going to do with it? And how do we use it? And why did nobody teach me about it already? Right. So I think the pace of development, there were some folks at the time, who were sort of like, it's just like when the calculator came out, everybody's freaking out, but it'll be fine. It's like, AI is not a calculator.
Yeah.
And a calculator was a relatively static kind of change. Okay, you got it. Now we have a calculator. Now we can think about. AI is changing constantly. And so I think the biggest thing that, I think the mistake that universities would make is trying to keep pace with the specifics, trying to constantly figure out, okay, which tool, what's the version of it today? Let's get that into the classroom. Let's get that in front of students, because you're never going to keep up. You can't. I think the most important thing is mindset, and it's